Welcome to Faith 2020 Roundtable with former Vice President Al Gore and Karenna Gore of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Really excited to be with you all today for this wonderful conversation where we'll be talking about caring for the planet as well as doing that well in the pandemic. We're all trying to learn new rhythms while we're also seeing so much unveiled in our time in the midst of this global emergency. And so I'm really excited to be here. I'm also joined by my dear friend Fred Davie of Union Theological Seminary and Rabbi Kobrin from Denver, who will be sharing with us a little bit at the end. Let's pray. God of love and God of creation, we are grateful for this time to lean in together and hear words of wisdom and words of action so that we might be equipped to be citizens, not just of this country, but of this planet. We ask that you be with us as we try to be with one another in a virtual way today. And we ask all these things as we seek the healing of this earth and one another. In all the holy names of God. Amen. Fred Davie, please take it away.
Thank you, Adam. As Adam said, I'm Fred Davie. I am the Executive Vice President of Union Theological Seminary in New York City, where I've been for about 10 years. And one of the great joys of being at Union has been the opportunity to get to know two people pretty well that I had known from afar for most of my life. And those two people are the ones who will be speaking to us today, Vice President Al Gore and Karenna Gore of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union. I have the pleasure of being able to introduce both of them today. I'm going to introduce Karenna first, and she will speak, and then I'll introduce the Vice President, and he will speak, and then we will have time for a little bit of Q&A at the end. Let me acknowledge my colleague in the ministry, Rabbi Kobrin, and say how fortunate and happy we are to have you with us today as well. First, Karenna Gore. Karenna Gore is the founder and director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. The Center for Earth Ethics bridges the worlds of religion, academy, policy, and culture to discern and pursue the changes that are necessary to stop ecological destruction and create a society that values the long-term health of the whole. She is an ex officio member of the faculty of the Earth Institute at Columbia University as well. Miss Gore's previous experience includes serving as director of Union Forum at Union Theological Seminary, legal work at Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett, and in the legal center of the Sanctuary for Families, and serving as a director of many community organizations. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and my friend, Karenna Gore. Karenna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fred, and thank you to all of you for that warm welcome and gracious introduction. I am honored to participate in this discussion about faith and the 2020 election. I respect the work that you all do, and all of you who are tuning into this webinar, thank you for your time. And it's a personal pleasure to share this platform with my father, who has given so much of his life to public service and also to deep thinking about the way we come together in this country to form a more perfect union and uphold the ideal of democracy, government for the people, of the people, by the people. Faith means different things to different people. For some, it is grounded in conventional religious institutions, teachings, and communities. For others, it's related to spirituality or moral principles without regard to those conventions. In this country, it is especially important to recognize the historical weight and delicacy around faith-based conversations about politics, both because we have foundational principles of freedom of religion and separation of church and state, and also because the colonial concept of religion did some violence historically in this country to many people. And I want to especially mention that it did some violence to the dignity and spiritual sovereignty of Native American peoples. Freedom of religion was not extended to them. And so we must do more work to learn from and honor those traditions, especially when it comes to the issues at stake in the 2020 election, and especially when it comes to the urgent need to reorient our attitudes towards nature. One of the great benefits of interfaith dialogue, and I've been happy to be able to engage in it and learn more about it in the years I've been at Union, which is now not quite as long as Fred, but I came maybe 8 years ago as a student, and then working there. And Union has a great legacy of interfaith dialogue. One of the powerful things about that is that it can help distill the values that we hold in common across traditions without regard to any dogma or belonging in particular groups. It can also unmask some of the bad theology that we may not even recognize anymore because it is so ingrained in seemingly secular structures and ways of society. And chief among bad theology is the notion that the earth, air, water, soil, forests, other species, is simply a collection of objects to dominate and exploit. Of course, that has been and still in some ways is intertwined with the legacy of white supremacy and the still present notion that some people's lives are expendable to whatever the forces of empire determine to be in its interest. At the Center for Earth Ethics, we seek to draw from the best of faith and wisdom traditions to confront the root causes of our ecological crisis and to seek a better way. We've become very aware of how intertwined these social, racial issues are with the ecological crisis. And one of the ways we've been able to explore this and help build the movement that so many others are helping to build is through an annual ministers training. And I wanted to mention that because it has been the main way in which I've been able to work with my father and the Climate Reality Project. And when we do that work, we come together to talk about ministry in the time of the climate crisis. And we explore not only the policy and the science, but also the different roles that faith can play. The prophetic tradition in faith leadership, telling the truth, now more important than ever. And also the pastoral, helping to guide people through times of difficulty, of grief and anxiety, and to come together in a good way. So that is one of the ways in which Center for Earth Ethics has worked, and one of the ways that I'd be so interested to connect with many of the viewers on this wonderful platform to find a way that we can learn more from you and do that in a way that can inspire more civic engagement in this very, very important year. Ethics, the Center for Earth Ethics, takes its name from ethics as a way not only to distill the best of those faith and wisdom traditions, but as a discipline. Ethics is determinations of right and wrong, or alternatively, good and evil, moral or immoral, and the implications of those determinations for how we live as collectives and as individuals. Ethics is most powerful when a deep sense of right and wrong is out of step with both laws and social norms. That has been true in times of great change in this country, abolitionism and women's suffrage, the civil rights movement among them. In each of those cases, voices from within faith traditions brought people to moments of great clarity and commitment. They brought moral reasoning to the fore and built movements and helped pull our civic discourse and our politics into alignment with our deepest sense of what is right and wrong. We live in such a time today. The climate crisis, and I know my father will say more about this, is already harming the most vulnerable people in the world, the very people who did the least to cause it. It is wiping out countless species of life, and of course, it does ultimately threaten the very habitability of the earth. The same activity that is the main driver of climate change, the burning of fossil fuels, also creates pollution in air and water that harms the health of the most vulnerable people. And we can see now in this COVID-19 pandemic that that is part of what creates the health disparities that make people more vulnerable to COVID. This is all because of a structural problem based on bad values. The economic development paradigm, the way we think about economy that's based on short-term monetary gain, no matter how inequitable, no matter what the pollution or depletion of resources. All these factors have been considered externalities to the task at hand when people are talking about the economy, which is of course the main way that we do political discourse in this country. And so we need to consider how to change this at its root, and we need to bring our deepest sense of values. And I want to close by bringing a construct from a friend of mine at the Church of Sweden, Reverend Henrik Grape. He says that in every room where decisions are being made around policy, particularly energy and environmental policy, there should be 3 empty chairs, and they should be designated for those who are least likely to have a voice and most impacted by the decisions that will be made. And those chairs should be for the poor and marginalized people of the world, for future generations, and for all non-human life. And if you think about it, it's not just that this is more fair and just, it's also that had we been thinking about those 3 groups all along in making our decisions, we would never have gotten to this crisis point that we're at now. When we hear the great teaching from Martin Luther King that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, it refers to that dimension of the problem that we're dealing with. And it is also similar in meaning to the teaching from the great Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. We are here to awaken to the illusion of our separation. So now is a time when we can come together and realize that politics should not be something that is separate at all from people of faith and faith communities. Politics is simply the way people living in groups make decisions. And we now more than ever need those who feel a deep sense of right and wrong is at stake here, who have values and teachings and wisdom to share, to come and engage and join with us as we make the changes we need to make. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to hear the rest of the program and hopefully from some of the viewers.
Thank you, Karenna. Thank you so much. And we will hear more from you during the Q&A, and we look forward to that. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you former Vice President Al Gore, who is the founder and chairman of Generation Investment Management and the founder and chairman of the Climate Reality Project, a nonprofit devoted to solving the climate crisis. He is also a senior partner at Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers, and a member of Apple Inc.'s board of directors. Mr. Gore was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1976, 1978, 1980, and 1982, and to the U.S. Senate in 1984 and 1990. He was inaugurated as the 45th Vice President of the United States on January 20, 1993, and served for 8 years. And I will digress just a minute here to say many of us spent many months extremely depressed over the decision of the Supreme Court in 2000. And we think it was a real missed opportunity for our country, but we very much appreciate the leadership you're providing now. He is the author of the #1 bestseller, New York Times bestseller, An Inconvenient Truth, and most recently, the New York Times bestseller, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. He is the subject of the documentary movie, An Inconvenient Truth, which won 2 Oscars in 2006, and a second documentary in 2017, An Inconvenient Sequel to Power. In 2007, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And without any further ado, I would turn over to you, the audience, our next speaker, the former Vice President of the United States of America, Mr. Al Gore.
Thank you very much, Fred. What a pleasure to be a part of this program. Thank you for inviting me along with Karenna, and what a pleasure it is to be with her on this program. Pray for me, because they say pride is a sin, and I'm very proud of my daughter Karenna, and you know the work that she has done at the Center for Earth Ethics and now at the Earth Institute at Columbia. So where to begin? I want to refer to some of the texts in my faith tradition that are relevant to why action on the climate issue is so imperative. But I want to start by expanding a little bit on what Karenna referenced, the nexus between COVID-19, this awful pandemic, and the climate crisis. We have been encroaching on the natural world and making it far more likely that some of the millions of viruses that are found in rainforests and wild areas come into contact with human beings. And in an age of global air travel and globalization of all kinds, the risks that result include what we're going through right now in the United States. This pandemic has also rather obviously revealed for all to see some of the great fissures and weaknesses and legacies of racism and injustice that have bedeviled our nation for so long. The breathing in of fossil fuel air pollution creates many of the preconditions, as the doctors call them, that elevate the mortality rate from the COVID-19 disease. In fact, there have been a number of studies now showing that in areas with more nitrous oxides and soot or black carbon and other pollution that comes with the creation of CO2 by the burning of fossil fuels. It's the CO2, of course, that heats the Earth system and creates the climate crisis. But when these fossil fuels are burned, they also produce prodigious amounts of what we commonly call conventional air pollution. But this has caused an inequitable impact on people who are living downwind from the smokestacks and downstream from the hazardous waste flows and adjacent to the coal ash sites and the hazardous chemical waste sites. And there are, of course, many other factors that also help to explain the much higher death rate among African Americans in the United States from COVID-19. The latest figures this month show that per 100,000 population, the number of deaths among white people is 16 and a half, among African Americans 42.8. In almost every state that collects the statistics with reference to race, not all states and cities do, but among those that do, you've probably seen some of them referenced on the news. It's now expected, commonplace, typical for the numbers to show whatever the percentage of the African American population is in that state or city, the percentage of the deaths from COVID-19 is a little more than twice as high. How can we possibly react without feeling a surge of energy to do something about this? And of course, unequal access to health care, the depressive and toxic impacts of racism itself. There are multiple studies that show that African Americans are more likely to live in housing arrangements that are not as healthy, more likely to have lower incomes, more likely to have jobs that you can't zoom into, as we're zooming into this meeting right now. And now they're essential workers, but as others have said, they're not given the essentials they need to save their lives and protect themselves. My friend, Congressman John Lewis, has often said, when you pray, move your feet. And to me, that means obviously don't just rely on the prayer itself, but be an active agent of putting the things you are praying for into reality, being an agent of the justice that you're working for. Karenna introduced me to Reverend William Barber II, and she and I have gone on tours of several states with Reverend Barber as part of the new Poor People's Campaign. Several states in the South to largely African-American low-income communities, and we've collected firsthand evidence showing the effects of this injustice. One statistic that sticks in my mind, I've repeated it often, but it's just shocking to me, and this is before COVID-19. The percentage of African-American children that die from asthma is literally 10 times the rate that white children die from asthma. Again, how could we not have addressed that long since? And of course, this is a complex issue, but ultimately it's very simple. It's a matter of justice, and the field of environmental justice that is very much a part of Karenna's discipline, earth ethics, speaks a lot to this. A Harvard study just showed that here in the United States, the infection rate and the death rate in areas that have more fossil fuel air pollution goes up. The same thing was showed by studies after the SARS coronavirus epidemic 17 years ago. A brand new study, 2 weeks old, out of China, looked at 324 cities in China and found a linear relationship between the infection rate, serious case rate, and death rate from COVID-19, correlated precisely with the amount of air pollution, largely fossil fuel burning air pollution in those Chinese cities. And 18 months ago, a study went back and looked at the great flu pandemic of 1918, 1919. And the deaths were correlated city by city with the amount of coal that was being burned in those cities during those times. So these cases all show exactly the same thing. Overall, well, the Washington Post did an analysis showing that majority Black counties in the United States have a 3 times higher infection rate with COVID-19 than people in majority white counties. And the death rate of majority Black counties, 6 times higher than in majority white counties. One other point on the nexus between COVID-19 and the climate crisis we are seeing today here in the United States and in both India and Bangladesh, another aspect of this nexus. The climate crisis is causing these extreme weather climate related events. One of them is playing out in Michigan. You've seen in the news these 3 dams have burst after days and days and days of torrential rain bomb downpours in Michigan. The dams couldn't hold the water back, and up to 9 feet of water, and people are being evacuated. And last I checked, no lives have been lost there, thank goodness, up until now. But these rain bombs are a signature of the climate crisis. In the Midwest, partly in Michigan, last year, 20 million acres of prime farmland could not be planted last year because the extra heat going into the oceans is putting all this extra water vapor into the sky. It's brought by atmospheric rivers over the land where it falls as these rain bombs. Hurricane Harvey dumped 5 feet of rain in Harris County, Texas. I could give many other examples, but this appears to be a repeat this spring of what happened last spring and summer and during what would have been the harvest season in the Midwest. Simultaneously, same day, today, 3 million people in the eastern part of India and the western part of Bangladesh, where this massive typhoon, the strongest in decades, and in some areas the strongest ever measured, again, as the oceans warm up, these events become much stronger. Well, we're putting, on average, we've been putting about 152 million tons of man-made heat-trapping global warming pollution into the sky every single day, mostly from the burning of fossil fuels. And that thin shell of atmosphere is filling up. And they stay there, these molecules, on average about 100 years. And they trap now, the accumulated amount traps as much heat as would be released by 500,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day in the Earth's atmosphere. I mean, it's just unimaginable that we're doing this and not ringing every alarm bell that's available to ring, and mobilizing people to respond to this. And of course, just to conclude on the nexus between the pandemic and the climate crisis, when these people are rescued in Michigan and Bangladesh and India, they are typically taken to shelters where social distancing is not as easy to do, and the rescue workers are vulnerable as well. And God bless all of our essential workers and emergency workers and medical workers. We've all felt this just overwhelming sense of gratitude for what they're doing. So before I conclude, I mentioned that I wanted to just briefly reference some of the texts that have been motivating to me. Some of these I learned from Karenna. It's been such a privilege to be part of the very extended Union Theological family, so to speak, and every once in a while coming to some of Karenna's events and getting to know you as a friend, Fred, during the process. I was taught by a truck driver in Sunday school in Elmwood, Tennessee, about 3 miles from where I am right now, a lesson that I did not learn in college or in the Graduate School of Religion at Vanderbilt. What's the purpose of life? Well, this truck driver said the purpose of life is to glorify God. And I have over the years taken that as a key element of my faith. What does that mean? It means to me to live one's life in a way that brings glory to God, to the extent that we as human beings are capable of making choices that allow us to do that. And it's not just about us. It's not even just about human beings. In Genesis, Noah, the story of Noah is quite well known. Of course, by the way, I have to insert a little aside about, again, referencing these climate-related extreme weather events. North of here in Kentucky, some entrepreneurs built a giant replica of Noah's Ark. It's a tourist attraction. And last year, I haven't seen the outcome of this lawsuit, but they just sued their insurance carrier for getting reimbursed for flood damage to this replica of Noah's Ark. And hard to make some of this stuff up. But in any case, Noah was instructed on his duty to the other living species with which he shared the earth, with which we share the earth. Keep them alive with thee. It was the whole purpose of the ark. Well, here we are in an era known as the sixth great extinction, in which up to half of all the living species with which we share God's earth are in danger of extinction because of human activities. We have an obligation to keep them alive with us. So I'm gonna maybe skip over some of the rest of these that I wanted to go to because I want to get to your questions. But, you know, Karenna organized an interfaith study group with and Rabbi Korn, it's so wonderful to be with you on this event, and a rabbi across the street, an imam from one of the Muslim denominations, a number of others. Karenna helped organize this study group of Laudato Si. And of course, the Holy Father has taught, among other things, the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest. He went on to say, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. This election, obviously, and we're doing this event in the context of this election, and Adam, thank you, and Fred, and all of you who have organized Faith 2020. And boy, it seems to me in my lifetime, I've heard regularly at election time, this is the most important election in American history. This time it really and truly is. I think we all feel that in our bones. We understand it very thoroughly. As a recovering politician, I always remember the ringing words of a labor leader in one of my campaigns as he was exhorting volunteers early to bed, early to rise, work like hell, and organize. And I don't know if work like hell is an appropriate injunction for Faith 2020, but I have the feeling that that spirit is very much alive in this group. I look forward to your questions. I think our task involves fighting against voter suppression. This is going to be a turnout election, by the way. I'll just say one other political word. Last year, or in the 2018 cycle, a year and a half ago, in the state of Kentucky again, the incumbent Republican governor got 200,000 more votes than he did 4 years earlier when he was elected. His voters turned out in massive and unprecedented numbers. But the Democratic voters turned out in even larger numbers with 350,000 more votes than the nominee 4 years earlier had received. Nobody should be under the illusion that those supporting President Trump and those who are part of his coalition are gonna be discouraged and not go out to vote. They will in massive numbers. But referring again to John Lewis, when you pray, move your feet. Also move your fingers if it's a mail-in ballot. Move your heart, move your spirit, connect others, get people registered to vote, check out, make sure they do vote, make sure they turn out, make sure they bring others. This is really and truly the most important election in my lifetime. And I'll close by again thanking you for taking the initiative to organize this group. And along with Karenna, I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice President. Thank you so much, Karenna. This has been just an amazing conversation. We do have a few questions that have been coming in, and we won't be able to get to all of them, but we have three that we've picked out. And one, Vice President Gore, you've talked about that this will be a turnout election, and me, as a progressive evangelical, I'm always looking to turn out the margins of the vote, right? We're not going to win every block of votes in the country, but it's a numbers game, especially in these battleground states. And so one of my dear mentors in the movement, Rich Cizik from the New Evangelical Partnership for the Common Good, sent in a question, and he said, the Clarity Campaign Labs found out in 2016 that environmental voters lagged 10 to 20 points below the national average. So do you have any advice in terms of turning out people of faith, turning out environmental voters that cite that as a major concern of theirs for this cycle?
Well, I spend the majority of my time trying to motivate them and training grassroots climate leaders around the world. I'll have an online training this summer, and I'll circulate it to you and Fred and others in case any of our listeners would like to participate in that. You know, I guess a really thoughtful answer to your question, Adam, would involve a lot of things, but I think it comes down to passion. I think it comes down to how you deal with the fact that politics in America involves forming coalitions. Mm. In 2016, there was a passion deficit on the part of some in the Democratic or progressive coalition. Mm. That passion was suppressed by all of the online campaigning and Fox News and the Russian bots magnifying it. And we know from the intelligence community without any doubt whatsoever that they're going to be, already are actively interfering again. We have to turn out anyway. We have to realize that the forces of pollution and greed and those who want to continue the kind of inequitable social fabric that leads to these horribly unfair consequences from COVID-19, just to pick one example, are doing everything they can to try to keep our allies from not voting. One practical point I'd like to add, I've had now a number of conversations with Joe Biden since he effectively won the nomination, since Bernie Sanders and all of his other opponents in the primary endorsed him, and former President Obama. And in those conversations, I can tell you there's no doubt whatsoever he is in the process of strengthening his already impressive climate platform. Some of the other candidates took it a little bit farther than he did in the primary campaigns, but now he's joined hands with them. There's absolutely no doubt that he is making this a central cause of his campaign. And as somebody who's had a little bit of experience in presidential politics, I'll tell you, if you're thinking about voting for some third party or independent or thinking about staying at home, it matters. I mean, it really matters. So if that's your current way of thinking, please think again, pray over it, and then think again, and support Joe Biden. Or think of it this way, get Donald Trump out of that White House.
Amen to that. Fred, do you have a question?
Well, first of all, amen to that last comment and all the others that preceded it. But thank you, Mr. Vice President. Yep. So, Karenna, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about issues of faith, and particularly faith as it relates to the environment and the work that you do. Why should faith voters be committed to electing a leader who's also committed to science? Why is that important at this time?
Well, thank you, Fred, and thank you for everything. Well, science it's a little bit like the word faith. It's a word that can mean different things to different people in different contexts. There is a kind of trend to resist and resent experts telling us what to do in this country and in our culture. And in some ways, I'm very sympathetic to that. I think sometimes people will have that reaction when they hear something about scientists say and a reference to science, and sometimes science is grouped with technology, and there are things about it that we don't necessarily always think align with common sense and values. But science is really observations of the natural world, of the laws of nature, which one could also consider to be creation and even creator. Creation is not a static set of things. Creation is also the laws and processes by which we have the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the way that we breathe in the oxygen that is exhaled by the plants and the trees. This is both creation in that conception, and it is the laws of nature, which is science and scientists observe and bring to our attention. The divide between those two is merely a construct of a false way of thinking, which I do think was very much influenced by the process of colonization, to go back to that theme. Because when you look at the faith of traditional indigenous peoples, it is so close to science in many ways, the wisdom that they bring, and the attention that is paid to, for instance, if there's an animal species like the salmon, the Winnemem Wintu, Chief Kayleen Sisk in Northern California, and their connection to the salmon, is seeing the sacred in the way and the connection of their people who've depended for food and sustenance and all these things with this other living being. And so their feeling about watching the spawning and watching the effects of the change in the water cycle on the way that the salmons live is completely interconnected with their sense of the sacred. And I think in that way, for all of us, for people of faith, it is a world of wonder and charged with the deepest sacred meaning, to be able to observe our place, our humble place in this interconnected web of being, and then to be able to see that we can live in a better way in alignment with it. We can change our society from being at war, thinking we're going to win against the processes of nature, to being in alignment with it so that it can enhance all of our lives. And so for people of faith, to want to support candidates, elected officials, people in positions of public service and leadership who actually take science, that is absolutely imperative and in line with your commitment to creation and also to the truth. So thank you for the question. I do find that conversation between faith and science is a really critical and wonderful one, that actually has so much to offer, because in many ways you'll have that on one side, and on the other side this very outdated, very harmful, kind of deranged mentality that we are here to dominate and control.
I'm going to turn it back to Adam.
Thank you so much, Karenna. That answer reminded me of this quote that the great Franciscan teacher Richard Rohr has about that creation and nature is the first Bible. And of course, in the Christian scriptures, we hear this sense that creation groans and longs for the earth to be repaired, obviously picking up on Hebrew scripture themes. So I'm really resonant with that answer. Thank you. We have one final question. It comes from a colleague of Father Richard's, actually, Brian McLaren, also of the Living School in New Mexico. And he says this, he asks both of you, and it's kind of a follow-up to some of the conversation we've already had. What are the highest leverage commitments we as faith leaders can urge a future President Biden to make for climate? Of course, it's not just about the election, right? It's a future presidency. So what are some of these highest leverage asks that rabbis, imams, pastors, and priests can make?
You want to go first?
No, you go.
Well, my mind immediately runs to very practical agenda items. We need to stop the subsidies to fossil fuels, for example. Decades ago, an oil minister in Saudi Arabia, some of you know this quote, it's a real quote, told the king of Saudi Arabia in warning of the years ahead, he said, remember, the Stone Age didn't end because of a shortage of stones. It ended because something better came along. And we are right now in an era when the age of fossil fuels is ending. It may not seem like it right now. We still get 80% of our energy from fossil fuels. But if you look at the big markets for fossil fuels, one is generating electricity from coal and gas. Last year around the world, if you look at all the new electricity generation installed, 72% of it was from solar and wind. And now, we got used to these technology cost reduction curves. Sorry for the gobbledygook, but computer chips started getting cheaper by half every 18 months. And then we saw the same with flat screen TVs and mobile phones and so forth. I bring that up because it's a reference for the exciting news that solar energy and wind energy are following a similar trajectory in cost. Solar electric vehicles and batteries, and less well publicized, the thousands of efficiency technologies that are making it possible to sharply reduce the amount of pollution and the amount of energy that we use. And we have to re-examine the whole impulse toward constant expanding growth. That in itself is going to be a big challenge. But I think we need to start by eliminating the subsidies for fossil fuels and then paying attention to the infrastructure that we need to make this transition. You know, just to briefly refer back to the question about science, there's one obvious, glaringly obvious similarity between COVID-19 and the climate crisis. In both cases, we see the dangers of ignoring what the best scientists are telling us until it's almost too late. But there are also differences, one negative, one positive. One negative difference is that the consequences of the climate crisis are predicted to play out not just over years, but over centuries. And some, if we don't get busy soon, over millennia. And it's just unbearable to me to imagine a future time in which the generation of children today will be my age and look back at us, not to mention the generations following them ad infinitum, and say back to us in 2020, why did you not react to these warnings? The second difference is that in order to deal with the coronavirus that is killing so many people and causing so much suffering, we've had to shut down a lot of economic activity. The economist Paul Krugman draws the analogy to an induced coma in medical care from which the patient can be awakened. And that's sort of what's happening. But with the climate crisis, we need to shut down the burning of fossil fuels, but we need to open wide on the new jobs in solar and wind and these other areas. You know, the fastest growing job in the United States right now is solar installer. It's growing 5 times faster than the average job growth. And in the decade ahead, it's projected to grow 10 times faster than the average job growth. What's the second fastest growing job today? Wind turbine technician. There was an Oxford Business Review that came out just last week, very distinguished panel of economists, including Joe Stiglitz at Columbia, Nobel Prize winner in economics, said that one of the top things we ought to be focused on is retrofitting buildings, commercial, industrial, and individual homes to make them better insulated with better windows and better lighting. That's a win-win-win proposition. You reduce the energy bills for people, you reduce the pollution, it saves money, it pays for itself, and it puts tens of millions of people to work in jobs that by definition cannot be outsourced. That's the kind of surge of employment that we need coming out of this pandemic when hopefully sooner rather than later, this thing is finally over.
Well, I can add something briefly. I know you probably want to get another question. Let me just say, in total agreement, and we have to accelerate a transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And just, you know, when you look at why we don't do it, it's because of money and power. It's because of the stranglehold that this industry has on our political process, on the people that are in office holding power. And so one of the things that we can do if we the corrosive effect of money in politics is a part of this. Like I said before, you know, sometimes ethics are out of line with laws and social norms. And in this case, we have a system which is basically bribery and corruption. Even if it's technically legal, that's what's going on here in our democracy. It's been completely taken over so that our environmental policies really reflect just this the desperate hanging on of this incredibly damaging and desperate industry. So in order to change that, I know the question was around the things that need to be done. I think we need to address our political process and the role that money plays, because that's at the heart of a lot of this. I also think when we think about the ecological crisis, we should consider water as well as a human right, and look at the fact that there are people, and the Navajo Nation is suffering right now so much from COVID-19, and they also have issues with water and access to water, and many communities do. We've all heard about Flint, but the fact that water, which it's sort of trying to, there are those who would have it shift in our mind to a commodity that's sold to us by corporations. This, for people of faith, is given from this earth and this creation and creator, as much as anything. We cannot let them that mindset commodify this and allow people to go without water. So I think we need to be thinking about those facets of our ecological crisis as well, and to make those changes so that we can ensure that everyone in this country has access, has safe, clean drinking water, very minimum. And so I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Karenna. Thank you, Vice President Gore. And thanks to all of those people who've joined us today. A lot of faith leaders from around the country have taken part in this conversation. They've sent many, many questions that we can't get to, but we appreciate them, and we appreciate all you for joining us. And we want to hear from Rabbi Raquel Kobrin, who will give us some final thoughts and bless us on our way. Rabbi Kobrin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you so much, Adam, for having me today. And Karenna and Vice President Gore, it's such a privilege to be able to speak and to be able to offer a blessing in your presence. And thank you so much for your words. Makor HaChaim, source of life. Limot Yamenu Ken Hoda, V'navi Levav Chochma. The Psalms teach us to count our days that we may have wisdom at heart. The Jewish people are in a very special time period on the calendar right now. It's a time period called the Omer, in which we count each day, counting up from our celebration of Passover to the holiday of Shavuot, from the holiday where we celebrate our release from deep degradation and bondage to the holiday in which we celebrate receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. We don't count down, which is interesting, like we might have counted or count when we're waiting for the ball to drop on New Year's Eve, or when we're preparing to launch a rocket into space. Instead, we count up, standing on the first day at the shores of freedom and hearing Pharaoh with his horses chasing us, up to day 50, when we stand in communal gathering, a gathering of hope, a gathering of possibility. On day 1, we stood with fear and longing, and these are feelings that have tremendous resonance today. And so we say, source of strength. We are here today because our traditions demand that when we feel fear and when we feel longing, we muster the strength to turn both of these feelings into hope and possibility. We don't just sit, we cannot just sit. We jump into that sea and we lead the people to the other side. Source of compassion, source of love. We are here today because we are in the midst of a pandemic made worse by extremism and poor leadership. But we cannot be paralyzed. Instead, we must shout louder and stronger our sacred principles. We will not stand idly by the blood of our neighbor. We will care for the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant. We will love the stranger as we love ourselves. Even as we shelter in place today, we will think beyond the 4 walls of our homes, and we will remember women's rights, LGBTQ rights, universal health care, and safer gun laws are all vital. We will continue our sacred work to build the reality in this country and in this world where human dignity is at the forefront. And source of hope. We are here today because while this pandemic is urgent, The deterioration of our climate is dire, because if we keep treating our earth as we have been, we will be counting down, not counting up. We will be counting down to a destroyed ecosystem and a destroyed planet, counting down as biodiversity shrinks, counting down as clean water and clean air become scarcer and scarcer. And finally, source of light. Today, we are in a difficult spot, but you urge us to move forward, to keep counting up, to embrace the American values of hope and possibility, to be a people of compassion, to be a people of love, to be a people of bravery, to be a people that keeps marching, a people that keeps yelling, a people that keeps voting until all of our voices are heard. Until our voices are heard in the streets, until our voices are heard in the Capitol, until our voices are heard in the White House, we will keep yelling, we will keep working, and we will keep working to secure the planet, the people, and the country that we so deeply believe in. We will count up from that Red Sea, away from Pharaoh and towards the teachings of compassion, of justice, and of hope that we so deeply believe in. And together we say, Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kobrin, for that inspired word. Thank you, Vice President Gore. Thank you, Karenna. Thank you, Fred. Thank you to all of our participants. So many amazing more questions have come in. We'll send them over to the Gores, and hopefully maybe they can incorporate some of those into their upcoming teachings and trainings. Look for more from Faith 2020 in the coming days. We've got an exciting schedule ahead. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay organized. Let's go. Take care.